The 2-year-old kept pointing at his father's coffin. What happened next was truly shocking. Hello, everyone. Sit back, relax, and take in these moments as you watch. Inside St. Michael's Church, the atmosphere was drenched in sorrow. The church bells tolled in long, solemn chimes, their echoes blending with the muffled sobs of the grieving, creating a chilling, heart-wrenching feeling. Clara stood silently beside her husband's coffin, clutching little Lucy tightly in her arms. The child wriggled in her mother's grasp, her small face flushed red from endless crying. Clara bent down, attempting to soothe her, but Lucy refused to be calmed. Her innocent eyes were locked onto the wooden coffin where Samuel lay, unmoving. "Papa, Papa." Lucy whimpered, her tiny fingers trembling as she pointed toward the coffin. Clara swallowed hard, gripping the black mourning veil tightly in her hands. She wanted to cry, but her tears wouldn't come, stuck somewhere deep in her throat. Samuel's sudden death still felt unreal, like a cruel nightmare. Just yesterday, he had kissed her before stepping out the door, and now, all that remained of him was a cold, lifeless body. Around Clara, the villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. No one could understand how a healthy man like Samuel could pass away so suddenly. Some murmured about an accident, while others whispered that it was fate's punishment. Madame Rose, an elderly woman from the village who lived near Clara, stepped forward, sympathy filling her aged eyes. Placing a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder, she whispered, "My dear, I know your pain is unbearable, but little Lucy, are you sure she's all right?" Clara glanced down at her daughter. Lucy was trembling, her wide eyes fixed on a dark corner behind the coffin. Then, suddenly, she let out a piercing scream. "Papa! Papa is trapped. He's calling for help." A thick tension spread through the air as a murmur rippled across the church. Nervous glances were exchanged, some quickly making the sign of the cross. Madame Rose stepped back, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. "Dear God, the child can see," she whispered in a voice filled with fear. A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine. She turned to Lucy, her voice unsteady. "Lucy, what did you say?" she asked, though her heart was already pounding. "Papa is there. He's calling for help, Mama. He's trapped," Lucy insisted, still pointing toward the darkened corner. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the church, making the altar candles flicker. No one spoke, but the heavy silence in the air told Clara everyone felt it. Then, the large church doors creaked open. The slow, eerie sound made everyone shudder. A tall figure stepped inside, dressed in black. His sharp gaze scanned the room before settling on Clara. It was Henry, Samuel's cousin. His face, though masked in sympathy, carried something else, something Clara couldn't quite place. He approached her, offering a small, practiced smile that felt oddly insincere. "Clara, you must be exhausted," Henry spoke, his voice deep, deceptively gentle. "We're all heartbroken over Samuel's passing." Clara gave a slight nod, too drained to respond. Henry's gaze flickered to Lucy, who was still clinging to her mother's dress, staring at that same dark corner. "The little one is too young to understand. It's best not to let her say such things, it might frighten people," he added, a subtle sharpness in his tone. Clara frowned. His words unsettled her. "She's just grieving her father," she replied, keeping her voice composed. Henry nodded, but his expression quickly shifted. "Clara, I hate to bring this up now, but Samuel left behind a lot of financial trouble," he sighed, feigning concern. "Your house. It might be best to consider selling it to settle his debts." Clara froze. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "Sell the house. What are you saying?" "You know." Henry exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Samuel was a good man, but he had his share of troubles. I'm just thinking about what's best for you and Lucy." A cold dread seeped into Clara's bones. She had never trusted Henry. And now, before Samuel had even been laid to rest, he was already talking about money. Lucy suddenly clung tighter to her mother's hand, her tear-filled eyes shimmering. Then, in a small yet clear voice, She pointed at the coffin again. Papa is trapped. Henry's head snapped toward her. For a brief moment, his face went rigid, frozen. The tension in the church thickened. Those standing nearby shifted uncomfortably, inching away. No one dared to speak. Clara crouched down, her heart racing. "Lucy, what did you just say?" Lucy met her mother's eyes, her tiny face full of fear. "Papa hasn't left," she whispered. "He's still here. He's calling for Mama." A suffocating silence settled over the church. Margaret, a woman standing nearby, tugged at another's sleeve and whispered, This isn't a good sign. A child so innocent wouldn't lie." Clara's grip on Lucy's small hand tightened. She tried to stop herself from trembling. Meanwhile, Henry clenched his jaw. His hands slowly curled into fists. "Children have wild imaginations," he chuckled, but the forced laughter was hollow. Clara, however, noticed his hands were shaking. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but deep down she could feel it. A heavy darkness seemed to creep through St. Michael's Church as the altar candles flickered weakly. After Lucy's words, those gathered around the coffin began to step back, avoiding Clara and her daughter, as if fearing what might come next. "Papa hasn't left. He's still here. He's calling for Mama." Lucy's words echoed in Clara's mind, sending a deep chill down her spine. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Henry, the man who, just moments ago, urged her to sell the house. He was still there, but now his composure wavered. His fingers nervously tapped against the wooden surface of a pew, his eyes darting away. "Come now, let's not let a child's words stir unnecessary fear." Henry forced a smile, but his voice, there was a slight tremor in it. Madame Rose, the oldest in the village, quietly made the sign of the cross before murmuring, "There are things beyond our understanding, unseen by most, but clear to the innocent." And at that moment, the church fell completely silent. Clara's breath came in short gasps, her body frozen in fear. She had to make a choice: listen to Henry's frantic protests or trust the chilling signs before her. Henry took a step forward, his face twisted in anger. "Enough. This madness must stop." His voice echoed through the church, but the villagers no longer looked at him with respect. Instead, suspicion gleamed in their eyes. Matthew locked eyes with Clara, his expression unwavering. "We need to open it." Henry's face paled. "No, that's desecration. You'd be disturbing his rest." James, the elderly villager, let out a heavy sigh. "If he is at rest, then what's knocking?" A wave of murmurs spread through the church. Then, suddenly the priest, who had been silent all this time, stepped forward, his face solemn. "We must be certain. We cannot bury a man who may still have breath in his body." Henry staggered backward as two men moved toward the coffin, their hands trembling as they reached for the lid. "No!" Henry roared, lunging forward, but Matthew caught him, holding him back with surprising strength. With a loud creak, the coffin lid was pried open. Gasps filled the room. Inside lay Samuel, his once peaceful face now twisted in agony, his fingers bloodied from scratching at the wood. His lips were slightly parted, as if he had been trying to scream. He had been buried alive. A woman shrieked. Another fainted. Clara felt her knees buckle. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, reaching out to touch her husband's lifeless hand. But then, Samuel's chest rose. A collective gasp filled the church. "He's alive!" Margaret cried. Pandemonium erupted. Someone ran for the doctor. Others burst into tears, while Henry stood frozen, his face void of all color. Matthew, his grip still tight on Henry's arm, narrowed his eyes. "You knew?" Henry swallowed hard, but before he could speak, Lucy's small voice rang out in the eerie silence. "Papa's not trapped anymore." And for the first time that day, Clara allowed herself to weep.